The first second does not carry violence, it carries certainty. A man's body moves forward convinced that the outcome is already written, that a projection begun correctly always ends the same way. Around him, the air seems to accept that old logic, heavy, repeated, unquestioned. 5 seconds later, that certainty no longer exists. Something happens too fast to be named, too simple to be disputed, too definitive to be ignored. There is no shout, no excessive impact, no celebration. Only the abrupt interruption of an order everyone believed to be unbreakable. Those watching do not understand what they saw. They only understand that something was broken. And when an invisible structure collapses, the silence that follows is always louder than any possible applause. Before that, the space breathes normality. A simple hall, worn wood beneath bare feet, mobile tatami mats that creak softly when someone shifts position. Light enters from the side, white and direct, casting hard shadows across the floor. Fans spin slowly on the ceiling, pushing Hong Kong's humid heat into every corner. People observe, some train, others merely watch, forming an atmosphere of quiet exchange. There are no bleachers, no clear boundary between those who teach and those who learn. Everything feels provisional, functional, almost improvised. Still, there is expectation in the air, as if that hybrid space is about to be tested. Nothing suggests confrontation, yet everything implies that an invisible line is about to be crossed. At the center of this environment stands a man who does not impose himself through volume or rigid posture. He observes more than he speaks, adjusts positions with minimal gestures, interrupts movements before they become mistakes. He displays no external symbols of recognized authority, carries no insignia meant to impress outsiders. For some, that is enough to underestimate him. For others, it is precisely what causes discomfort. The class continues until it is interrupted by a presence that does not ask for space. It takes it. The promise of that moment is not a fight, but a revelation. Something there will be exposed, not because someone seeks to prove superiority, but because certain certainties, when confronted with reality, simply do not survive. The late 1960s turned Hong Kong into a tense meeting point between tradition and rupture. On the streets, languages mix, influences collide, old hierarchies begin to creak. Inside that hall adapted for training, this tension manifests silently. It is neither a classical judo dojo nor a formal kung fu academy. It is a functional space, shaped for practice rather than ritual. The floor demands no reverence, only attention. Pale walls reflect enough light to expose every movement, every error, every hesitation. There are no symbols that impose automatic respect. Here, nothing guarantees authority before action. This environment exists precisely to test ideas, not to protect them. And that is why it becomes the perfect setting for a confrontation that seeks not trophies, but answers. The students present represent different paths. Some come from traditional styles, accustomed to rigid hierarchies and ready-made answers. Others search for something they cannot yet name. They only feel that something is missing. They observe in silence, attentive to details, trying to understand how this instructor organizes space, how he corrects without humiliating, how he interrupts movements at the exact instant before failure. There are no shouted commands, no ritualized counting. The rhythm is dictated by the body, not protocol. This absence of formality unsettles those who believe technique must be visible to be legitimate. The hall, in its raw simplicity, exposes that difference without a single word. Everything there seems prepared to reveal truths, not to hide them behind tradition. When the visitor enters, his presence immediately alters the balance of the space. He carries an authority that does not depend on that environment to exist. His body moves with trained confidence, upright posture, firm steps, an assessing, judging gaze. The uniform he wears communicates years of institutional validation, recognized achievements, respected hierarchies beyond those walls. He does not need to announce who he is. The way he occupies space does that for him. Those accompanying him reinforce the impression, positioning themselves as natural witnesses to an already presumed superiority. To them, that improvised hall is no more than an inadequate stage to discuss established fundamentals. The tension is born precisely there. Two systems of authority coexisting in the same space, both convinced they have no need to yield. Bruce Lee does not react immediately. He observes the arrival as he observes any movement, without haste, without apparent judgment. His body remains loose, aligned, ready, but not threatening. He understands the symbolic weight of that presence and the risk it carries for the environment he has built. At stake is not only his physical integrity, but the coherence of everything he teaches. Every student senses that something has changed, even without words. The space that once felt open now contracts slightly, as if awaiting an inevitable decision. There is no explicit challenge yet, but reality has settled. The confrontation does not arise from desire. It arises from the incompatibility of two visions that cannot occupy the same center at the same time. The imbalance begins to take shape without announcement. The visitor positions himself naturally at the visual center of the hall, like someone accustomed to being the reference point. His gaze scans the space, measures distances, identifies surfaces, evaluates bodies. He speaks little, but when he does, his tone is firm and definitive, charged with a conviction that admits no reply. His companions distribute themselves strategically, forming an implicit semicircle that pushes the students to the edges. Hierarchy installs itself through the simple arrangement of bodies. To those watching, it becomes clear who, at that moment, appears to have something to lose, and who seems merely to be confirming an already secured position. The contrast is not physical, it is symbolic, and it weighs more than any difference in strength. Bruce Lee remains where he is. He does not advance to contest space, nor retreat to avoid it. His posture does not challenge, but neither does it adjust to the newly imposed order. He hears the statement that cuts through the hall like a technical verdict. A projection begun correctly cannot be interrupted. There is no shout, only the absolute certainty of someone who believes he represents an entire system. The silence that follows is thick. The students feel the weight of that sentence because it does not question only one man. It questions the validity of everything they have learned there. Bruce Lee perceives this instantly. The pressure is not physical challenge, but pedagogical threat. To ignore it would be to accept that his teaching is fragile. To respond poorly would betray his own principles. The judoka steps closer. The distance is now short enough to eliminate ambiguity. He adjusts his base slightly, as one prepares for something inevitable. His center of gravity is firm, trained to advance and absorb resistance. There is no hatred in the gesture, only conviction. To him, the error is already defined, someone without formal training daring to question established fundamentals. The imbalance crystallizes at that moment. On one side, rank, tradition, public recognition. On the other, an independent instructor in an improvised space, surrounded by students who still cannot name what they are learning. The tension grows not because something happens, but because everything is ready to happen. Bruce Lee feels the students' eyes upon him. He senses their silent expectation, their fear that this philosophy will be dismantled in seconds. Internally, there is no anger, no need to prove superiority. There is only calculation and responsibility. He understands that any response must be precise, brief, definitive. It cannot be spectacle. It cannot be debate. External pressure transforms into internal focus. His body relaxes even more, as if preparing not to resist, but to accept a movement that is already coming. At that point, the apparent imbalance reaches its peak. To outside observers, the outcome seems obvious. Precisely for that reason, the antagonist's mistake is already complete, even before any physical contact occurs. The space adjusts to what is about to occur. Bodies around instinctively retreat a few centimeters, opening a void at the center of the hall. The sound of the fan seems louder, the creak of the tatami more noticeable. Time slows not because someone controls it, but because everyone anticipates impact. The judoka assumes position with the ease of someone who has repeated that gesture thousands of times. His feet find the correct angle, knees flex to the exact degree, torso projects forward with calculated confidence. Everything follows a familiar script. Bruce Lee stands before him, motionless only in appearance. His weight is distributed, not fixed. His eyes track micro-adjustments, not the broad gesture. He does not expect force. He expects commitment, and he knows that once the other commits, something will inevitably open. The phrase echoes again, now without words. You cannot interrupt my projection. It lives in the judoka's body, in the way he advances convinced that control already belongs to him. For observers, this is the irreversible threshold. There is no longer room for honorable retreat, nor for explanation. The confrontation has ceased to be conceptual. Bruce Lee perceives the exact moment when the other's decision closes. The error lies not in the technique itself, but in the belief that it exists isolated from time and context. The judoka trusts that once the sequence begins, it will lead to the desired end. That trust is total, And because it is total, it eliminates any margin for adaptation. The entire room holds its breath as this silent commitment solidifies. Bruce Lee does not anticipate. He does not try to stop the movement before it begins, nor break intention before it forms. He waits for the correct instant, the one in which force has already been accepted by the opponent's own body. His relaxation is not passivity, it is precise reading. He feels the minimal displacement of the other's center of gravity, the involuntary adjustment of the hips, the weight transfer that makes the movement irreversible. Everything happens quickly, but not chaotically. For Bruce Lee, each detail aligns with near mathematical clarity. He knows acting earlier would be confrontation, acting later would be too late. The threshold is invisible to observers, but absolute to those who understand the body as a system. And that threshold is now fully exposed. The students do not perceive the exact moment when everything is decided. To them, it is still approach, preparation, expectation. The judoka initiates the projection with full confidence, believing control is guaranteed by correct execution. Bruce Lee moves then, not to resist but to accept and redirect. His adjustment is minimal, almost invisible. A short step, a subtle rotation, a shift of axis that seems insufficient to change anything. And yet something in the space breaks. Time abruptly accelerates again. The point of no return has been crossed. There is no more rising tension, only the silent certainty that the next second will carry an irreversible consequence. Everything built up to that point converges on this single instant. The movement unfolds without audible warning, without dramatic impact, without wide gestures. The judoka transfers weight, initiates rotation, trusts the fit. In that precise interval, Bruce Lee alters the axis. He does not push, does not pull with visible force. He rotates together, displaces a minimal point of contact, breaks the line sustaining the other's center of gravity. The effect is not immediately visible to the eye, but it is absolute to the body. The judoka's body responds to a logic that no longer favors him. The floor appears where it should not be. In less than 5 seconds from the start of the projection, certainty dissolves. The trained body falls cleanly, controlled, without excessive violence, as if obeying an order it does not recognize. There is no identifiable technique to external eyes, no classic entry, no name capable of explaining what occurred. What remains is only consequence. Someone who advanced convinced now lies on the ground, trying to reorganize his own axis. The sound of impact is dry, brief, almost polite. Bruce Lee remains standing, stable, breathing at the same rhythm as before. To observers, the scene feels incomplete, as if something is missing to explain the outcome. The mind searches for familiar references and finds none. The projection was not blocked. It was emptied. The attack was not defeated by force, but by the silent removal of the support that sustained it. Everything happened too quickly to be denied, too simply to be contested. The judoka takes a second longer than usual to react, not from pain, but from disorientation. His body is intact, but understanding has failed. He supports himself on the tatami, tests his balance, raises his gaze still confused. The surrounding space remains still. No one approaches, no one comments. The moment does not invite noise. Bruce Lee does not assume a victorious posture. He simply watches the opponent regain control, attentive that the fall does not turn into humiliation. The gesture that won was technical, but the decision that follows is moral. He understands that repeating or explaining now would turn clarity into spectacle, and that would violate the principle that guided the entire movement. Without saying a word, Bruce Lee extends his hand. The gesture is simple, direct, almost too discreet for those expecting public confirmation. The judoka accepts it, still trying to organize his thoughts. As he rises, he realizes he was not dominated by superior force, but by something absent from the rigid repertoire he trusted. The confrontation ends there. There is no second attempt, no public correction, no technical commentary. The decisive moment has passed and needs no reinforcement. The space remains in absolute silence. What happened does not ask for applause. It asks for assimilation. In a few seconds, years of certainty were compressed into an experience impossible to erase. And precisely for that reason, the impact begins now, not when the body touched the floor. The silence that settles is not awkward. It is dense. It fills the entire hall, replacing any automatic reaction. The students do not know whether to look at Bruce Lee, at the judoka, or at the empty space where everything happened. Some still wait for a verbal explanation that never comes. Others try to reconstruct the movement mentally, attempting to fit it into known categories. Nothing fits. Discomfort arises exactly from that gap. What was seen does not violate principles, but neither does it confirm them in the expected way. The absence of celebration amplifies the impact. Had there been applause, the event could be reduced to personal victory. Without it, what occurred imposes itself as a problem to be understood, not a spectacle to be consumed. Bruce Lee reclaims the space naturally. He adjusts the slightly shifted tatami, as if closing an ordinary class. The gesture communicates that the moment requires neither reverence nor continuation. For the students, this is unsettling. They expected prolonged tension, perhaps verbal confrontation, perhaps a repeated demonstration. Instead, they receive normality. This choice redefines the meaning of the fall. It was not a dramatic exception, it was a logical consequence. The surrounding world must now adjust to that. The judoka remains silent, breathing deeply, observing his own body as if searching there for the explanation he did not find in the movement. External reactions begin to reorganize slowly. Postures shift. Gazes once confident become cautious. Some of the judoka's companions avoid eye contact, not out of shame, but uncertainty. There is no explicit defeat to contest, no clear technical error to point out. That prevents any immediate response. The hierarchy that seemed solid minutes earlier now lacks visible support. The entire environment appears to have learned something without knowing exactly what. And this is the moral turn of the episode. Victory did not redefine who is stronger. It redefined what it means to understand. The helping gesture after the fall weighs more than the fall itself. That is where character becomes visible. With time, what occurred begins to move from moment to memory, not as exaggerated rumor, but as a story difficult to explain. Experienced practitioners, upon hearing the description, recognize the hidden pattern. Precise use of time, reading of axis, acceptance of movement before redirection. There was no violation of judo fundamentals. There was a deep application of them outside the expected format. This validation does not happen in the hall, but in later dialogues, in the silent reflections of those who understand the body beyond form. For Bruce Lee, the episode does not alter the path, it confirms it. Teaching continues focused on principles, not technique names. The legacy solidifies there. When understanding is real, it does not need to impose itself, it simply happens. And the question that remains, inevitably, echoes beyond that space. When you truly master something, do you need to prove it? Or is it enough to let the truth reveal itself on its own?